Welcome to the Sales Training Connection video series, and thank you for tuning in. What I'd like to talk about today is a meeting I had with a group of sales leaders several months ago. The topic of conversation was the priority for sales training and the justification for that priority. Let me do a little framing before we get into the results of the discussion. First of all, today when I'm talking about sales training, I'm talking about sales skills training as opposed to product training or welcome to the company kind of training. Well, with that little bit of stage setting, let me kind of jump in. I think the first person that really made a salient point was the one who said, we got to remember, folks, that we are all coming out of a very difficult economic period. It's still been a dark tunnel that we've been traveling in the last several months. Priorities for monies are still very substantial. When we talked about that for some time, the decision was made, however, by a majority of the people that even with that said, sales training should still be a priority. Let me talk about the justifications that led us to that conclusion. The first was the notion that a competent sales force is a bigger piece of the competitive puzzle. Today, it is extremely difficult in most companies to win by product alone. If you have a great product on the market, the bad guys are probably going to come out with something that's almost as good in half the time and perhaps at half the price that they did 5 years ago. What that means is that the sales team has to be not only able to sell a competitive advantage, they have to be a competitive advantage. That's a different skill requirement than in times past. They have to add value by the way they sell. That requires a very skilled person. The second reason that was noted was the notion that today salespeople have to know more and know it at a higher level of proficiency. I think if you go back in time, say 10 years, and there was a book of knowledge in sales skills. And if a company did a fairly good job in selecting their salespeople, and the salespeople worked hard at developing their skills, you could master that book of knowledge in a reasonable time. Today, that book of knowledge is encyclopedic. The amount of information and skills and knowledge that a salesperson has to have in order to be superior is substantial. I think you can drive that home by going back in time and looking at who made the President's Club 10 years ago. My guess is that many of those people wouldn't even make the short list today, simply because the skill requirement has increased so much. What that means is some people clearly need help in developing those additional competencies. Training is one of the answers. The third point we talked about was this notion of the rapidity of change in the buying environment. I think if you look in most markets, who's making the decision, who's influencing that decision, what are the specifications for determining the winner are all changing at a rapid rate. What that means for the salesperson is they constantly have to adjust and adapt their skill set to this new buying environment. Now, can some people do that all by themselves because they're very talented? The answer is, of course, yes. On the other hand, some people take a fair amount of time and some people never make the transition. Here's where sales training can help. Sales training can help people to make that transition. That's a pretty good justification for taking it seriously. So, I think the results of the meeting were, it's probably useful to remain serious about sales training. If somebody asks you why, you might mention three things. One is, a superior sales force is a bigger piece of the puzzle today than yesterday. Salespeople have to be more competent today than they were yesterday. And it's tough to remain competent because the buying environment is constantly changing. You constantly have to adapt and adjust your skill set. Well, we would love to hear your thoughts on this topic. And again, thank you for tuning in to the video series.